Hi and welcome to my channel, JL Wood Artistries. Let's get into this build. After changing out my table saw blade, I got started by ripping down 3/4 inch plywood for the sides. Next, I moved to the miter saw where I measured and cut the first side to size. Then I used it to mark the second side. I find this to be more efficient and accurate than taking new measurements. After this was done, I cut down some 2x4s to length, once again measuring and cutting one board and then using it to trace out a cut line on the subsequent boards. Subsequent, that's a big word for me. Usually I speak at about a second grade level, so hopefully I pulled that off. After all my boards were cut to length, I moved back to the table saw. Here I took off the rounded edges of the boards for what will become the legs. I also cut the rails down to smaller widths. Finally, I cut a groove into the side rails to accept the 3/4 inch plywood. I did this by making multiple passes on the table saw, moving the fence over a little bit at a time until the groove was wide enough for the plywood. To finish the legs, I angle cut the bottoms on all 4 sides. This will give the bench a bit of a floating appearance and also prevent the bottoms of the legs from chipping if the bench is moved across the floor. It really shouldn't be moved across the floor all that much, but I have kids, and that means you have to plan for everything happening that shouldn't happen at all. For assembly, I used pocket hole joinery. I used my Kreg jig to cut pocket holes into the ends that I needed joined together. A lot of pocket holes. I mean, a lot of pocket holes. It wasn't that many, but it was a lot. Then I screwed the whole thing together. I used clamps where I could to hold the pieces tightly together so they didn't shift around while I was driving in the screws. Off camera, I cut the bottom and middle divider out of more plywood. Here's a little tip for you. Tape a scrap piece of wood to the face of a board before adding the clamp. The scrap wood will prevent the clamp from leaving an indentation into the surface of the board. You can see I installed the center divider with, you guessed it, more pocket hole joinery. I found an old 2x4 behind my shop to make the small barn door out of. I was able to get all 4 sides of the door frame out of the 2x4 on the miter saw. After this was done, I used the table saw to cut a rabbet down the length of the boards. This will allow the plywood center to sit flush into the frame of the door. Then I miter cut the corners of the frame at 45 degrees. I used Titebond 3 wood glue and held the frame together with clamps while the glue set up. I used some scrap cutoffs to make the barn door X. I set the pieces diagonally into place and traced my cut lines with a mechanical pencil. Then I lined up the mark with the miter saw blade and made my cut. Sometimes it's good to not cut right on that cut line, but to actually sneak up on the line with several cuts and checking the fit in between cuts. I glued the plywood center to the frame and pin nailed it from the back. Then I flipped the door over and installed the X with more glue and pin nails. Then it was on to the crates. I made the 2 crates out of reclaimed cedar boards. After removing some staples, I cut the boards to length using the miter saw and a stop block for fast, repeatable cuts. Then I ran them through the planer to remove material on one side of the boards and bring them down to a consistent thickness. Then I sanded the other side of the boards with 120 grit sandpaper, being careful to leave some of the rough surface in place. The plain down sides of the boards will end up being on the inside of the crates, with the rougher sides on the outside of the crates. This will give the crates some rustic character on the outside, while leaving the inside smooth to the touch. Then all the boards were ripped to size on the table saw. I used stir sticks in between the horizontal boards for even spacing. Then I clamped everything together and used glue and pin nails to attach the vertical corner boards. I repeated this process until I had the front and back sides of the crates assembled. Then I began working on the left and right sides of the crates. I first glued and pin nailed the corner boards in place. Then I stood the front and back sides up and added glue to the inside of the corner boards. Next, I added the horizontal boards and used the same stir sticks as spacers. Finally, I pin nailed the horizontal boards to hold them in place while the glue set up. I ran a bead of glue around the bottom edge of the crates and to the inside of the corner boards, added a sheet of 1/2-inch plywood, and more pin nails. I also framed in the bottoms of the crates to hide the exposed plywood. I slid that bottom frame board up against the corner board, marked the other side, and made my cut on the line. And with more glue and pin nails, it was attached to the crate. I used a Forstner bit to drill in the holes for handles. I clamped a piece of scrap wood to the underside to reduce tear out as the bit drilled all the way through. I used a straight edge to draw my layout lines and cut the rest of the handle out with my jigsaw. I guess they're not actually handles, they're more like handholes. Handholes. They're more like handholes. The crates were stained with Varathane Smoke Gray. Once dry, I used 120 grit sandpaper to remove some of the stain and bring out that rough wood grain. This gives the crates a weathered, rustic look. I ripped down 4 boards to width on the table saw to make the top of the bench. I added wood glue and clamps and set it aside overnight to dry. After removing it from the clamps, I cut the top to size using a circular saw and a straight edge. I used a router to chamfer the top edge. The top was then stained with the same smoke gray as the crates. I sanded the stain back a bit and then added 3 coats of Minwax clear satin spar urethane, sanding with high grit sandpaper in between coats. Off camera, I painted a base coat on the bench with Rust-Oleum satin espresso, and then a top coat with Rust-Oleum chalked linen white. I lightly sanded the bench with 220 grit sandpaper to bring out that base layer of espresso for a distressed farmhouse look. I added the barn door hardware to the bench and then to the door, making sure to pre-drill first to avoid splitting the wood. To install the top, I first cut slots into the top rails with my biscuit joiner, and then inserted Z-top fasteners into the slots and screwed them into the underside of the top. The fasteners can slide around in the slots, which will allow the top to expand and contract with seasonal changes. And with that, the farmhouse bench was done. I hope you've enjoyed this project and maybe found some inspiration to make one for yourself. Thanks again for watching. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for the support. I really do appreciate it. Please take care and stay safe. Goodbye.